Black Myth Wukong has definitely been one of the biggest hits of 2024, quickly becoming one of the best sold single-player games of all time. And now that we've gone through all of it, some of you maybe even multiple times, the remaining question on everybody's mind is what's coming next? Well, Game Science actually has the answer to that, as they just officially confirmed we're going to get a full-blown expansion. And no, it won't take 6 more years to finish that, it's actually coming way sooner. We have this interview that Bloomberg put out with Daniel Wu, one of the main investors over at Game Science, so lots of new info to talk about, and let's jump right in. Now, I'm going to cite directly from the Bloomberg article. I'm pretty sure that you need to make an account to actually see this. So if you haven't, here's pretty much the relevant bit over here as it pertains to the actual expansion. So it won't take another 6 years for the next chapter in what's planned to be a series based on Chinese mythology, though that won't be a sequel. Instead, Game Science is working on an expansion to Wukong, which will give it a chance to monetize the game a second time. Think of it as 2022's Elden Ring, a title with similar playstyle and design, which has shown how the release of an expansion, in this case this year's Shadow of the Erdtree, can spur a fresh flurry of sales for the original. And we kinda know that Shadow of the Erdtree went ahead to sell at least 4 million copies just in the first few days after its launch, pretty much solidifying this as one of the best single-player experiences of all time. As a quick side note, at the time of this article, which is September 5th, it's been confirmed that Black Myth Wukong has sold over 18 million copies in just 2 weeks. And since its release on August 20th, the game has broken multiple records for single-player titles, eclipsing the likes of even Cyberpunk 2077. And in total, it's estimated to have earned over 700 million US dollars so far, pretty much only being overshadowed by the record-breaking Call of Duty historic 1 billion in 10 days. Which is pretty absurd to think about given how this is the studio's first big AAA title. Though not the first game they ever put out. In fact, they put out 3 other games in the past. Unfortunately though, all of them were pretty much flops, so Game Science has struck out with its 3 prior efforts, which were more modest free-to-play mobile games chasing attention in the world's biggest games arena. One of them, Art of War Red Tides, even got prime placement on the iOS App Store, but to no avail. And even if you take a look at the Steam charts, because it's been re-released on Steam in the meantime, I think that at max it had about 4,000 players and less than 100 still play to this day. But then there's also this interesting part later in the article about Fang and his own team's experience with games, especially at Tencent. So Wukong founded Hero Games in 2015, Hero Games being of course one of the biggest outside investors in Game Science, and after a 3-year stint with the famed Chinese venture firm, he zeroed in on Fang and his Game Science team early on, describing them as an asset that he could not afford to miss out on. At Tencent, Fang had to lead a team of 250 people on the development of online role-playing game Asura, inspired by similar folklore to Wukong. The title launched in 2010 and initially won praises for its design, though it later upset players with practices around its in-game shop that were deemed exploitative. So it's very interesting to see their stance on that given their experience with free-to-play games, and also kinda explains that whole message in the QA section behind the game not having any microtransactions or pay-to-win stuff in it, and something that you can quote and even screenshot as that is a guarantee from them. So yeah, definitely seems that whatever expansion follows next, it's not going to ever include any pay-to-win or microtransaction stuff. It's always going to be single player, and I'm really glad because the game is an absolute blast to play, and it would really be a disservice to have anything of sorts in it. And maybe this will mean we also get back some of the missing bosses and zones that we've seen in the trailers but never made it in the final product. So one of them is actually something that I digged around for some of the Chinese forums, and we actually kinda got confirmation from the developers at some point about Wukong versus the 100,000 Celestial Court soldiers that we've seen in, I believe, one of the first ever reveal trailers. So apparently this part was too boring, that is why Game Science eventually took it out. I'm pretty sure it was one of the developers, if not Fang himself, who did confirm that. It's just that it didn't feel fun playing it, and the comparison made was with, yeah, basically mowing the lawn, which is pretty interesting, though I think they could have still implemented that and kinda give you that feeling of being very overpowered. Or maybe they could have pulled off a Dynasty Warriors sort of encounter, kind of have it that way. We've kind of seen the tri-point spear being capable of doing insane like AoEs through enemies if they stay on a line in front of you, of course, but they could have definitely done something with it. I kind of still wish this was coming back. We have at least a few more enemies that are completely missing from the game, including their respective zones. So for example, this giant cobra enemy that seems to have a lot of those serpent-like moves would have definitely been very annoying, especially in such a tight spot. Then there's this fight against what I presume to be some Chapter 6 Celestial Court initial enemy encounters, though what's peculiar here is of course that attack plus finishing move, which we don't really have in the full game, so maybe a different stance that at some point didn't make it in the full game. Then we have this Thor-like boss encounter that's also missing. He seems to be charging that sword with thunder, also wields a shield in the other hand. The whole area seems to be absolutely blasted, trees and everything else pretty much on fire. Now, I'm not certain if this is chapter 2 or not, but it kind of reminds me a bit of that. And the next one, I would presume to be chapter 3, kind of looks like one of the lake areas, I guess, in that location, especially since there's also some apparent snow around, but it's definitely completely different than the rest we've seen. This giant bird boss with a huge spear, and I'm not gonna lie, I think that the white clad armor fully upgraded would absolutely make this entire boss fight a breeze, just because of the massive healing factor that you get while standing in water. Also, I'm pretty sure that this is an earlier iteration of one of the secret boss fights, the one at the end of Kingdom of Sahari that you unlock in chapter 2, because we have the same giant sort of heads, and then once the character falls, we can see that, yeah, it's pretty much the same insect boss right here from the pincers and from the way it looks. But yeah, I mean, it's like several orders of magnitude bigger than the one in game, and that is big as it is. So yeah, this would have definitely been even crazier. However, most disappointed I am at the fact that there are so many missing areas from chapter 2. It seems that initially it was way bigger, containing a lot more zones and enemies than before. Like, there are whole sections here that I do not even recognize. And yes, some of the enemies over here seem to be in the full game, like many of these red mages and blade dancers you can actually get as spirits and even fight against, similarly to the footage, but there are some in there that look really wild. There's even like a boss fight that we never got against this giant bull, and of course also this crazy encounter versus, like, I don't know, 20 or so archers. We kind of got a similar one versus 4 at the village entrance, but it was nowhere near that absolute level of craziness, so you would definitely need Cloud Step or Azure Dust to even survive that. Beyond that, chapter 1 also appeared quite a bit different than what it is in the final product. Like, for example, just before the boss encounter with the giant wolf, we, in at least the reveal trailer, had a big fight with a lot of enemies at the same time, way more than we have in the full game, no matter the chapter, which seems really interesting, but it didn't make it. It seems that most of the fights we have are very one-on-one, or 2-3 maximum at the same time. You very rarely have 5+ enemies fighting against you at any single time. I guess it makes sense, maybe even for performance reasons. Then it also pops off that Azure Dome monkey form, which we only get from the secret ending. Again, very interesting. I kind of thought about it, and maybe, you know, I thought that this would be a New Game Plus run, but then it doesn't make sense because, of course, it has the starting armor and all the starting attacks and whatnot. Beyond that, even in the fight against the big wolf enemy, we have the Pluck of Many being used in the old footage, which doesn't make sense because this comes in quite a bit later after this, in about chapter 2, once you reach the Cellar Waypoint. And many others in there, but for the most part, I am excited about the expansion. It seems that there was a lot of creativity behind the game and many missing features that I cannot wait to see. Plus, some really big expectations of some amazing mythology being added. Like, we haven't seen the last of the Celestial Court. We've also talked about some really good characters from the lore over there, so I am kinda half expecting some of them to make it in that expansion. This is it though for now. Let me know down below if you're also excited for it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.